Chapter 6 of Blackbeard Buccaneer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carlos Recio. Titled by Ralph D. Paine. Chapter 6. The Voyage of the Little Raft. These sturdy youngsters were not easily frightened, and Jack Cockerell, the landsman, was confident that wind and tide would change to send the little raft shoreward. So tranquil was the sea that they rode secure and dry upon the cabin hatch, which was buoyed by the two short spars. Joe Hawkridge was silent with foreboding of a fate more bitter than the perils which they had escaped. He had seen a lone survivor of a crew of pirates picked off a raft in the Caribbean, a grisly phantom raving mad who had not the flesh of his dead comrades. They drifted quietly before the land breeze, beneath a sky all jeweled with bright stars. The fire on the beach dimmed to a red spark, and then vanished from their wistful ken. They could no longer see the light on the wreck of the Plymouth Adventure. Now and then the boys struggled with the heavy oars and rowed until exhausted, but they knew they could be making no headway against the current which had gripped the derelict raft. They ate sparingly of flinty biscuit and leathery beef, pickled in brine, and stinted themselves to a few swallows of water from the wooden breaker or tiny cask. "Hunger and thirst are strange to ye, Jack," said young Hawkridge, as they lay stretched side by side. "Hanged if I ever did get enough to eat till I boarded the Plymouth Adventure. Skin and bone I am. I'll not call this a bad cruise unless we have to chew our boot tops. A pesky diet is leather. I've tried it." "Truly, Joe?" cried Jack in lugubrious accents. "We may have more heart when morning comes, a piping easterly breeze, such as is wont to come up with the sun in Charlestown, and we can steer for the coast all taut and cheery." "I dread the sun, Jack, for men adrift the blaze of it fries them like fish on a grid. A pint of water a day, no more, is the allowance. 'Twill torture you, but castaways can live on it. They have done it for weeks on end. Here's 2 musket balls in my pocket. I can whittle a balance from a bit of pine, and we must weigh the bread and meat." "2 musket balls? Weight of food for a meal?" protested Jack. "Not a morsel more," was the grim answer. "Granted we be not washed off the silly raft and drowned when a fresh breeze kicks up the sea, we may hold body and soul together through 5 or 6 days. But some vessel will sight us, Joe, even if the plight is as dark as your melancholy fancies paint it. And I thought you a light-hearted mariner in danger." "The sea is a cruel master, and she hath taught me prudence," was the reply. "A vessel sight us? I fear an empty sea so soon after the storm. And honest ships will be loath to venture out from port if the word sped that Blackbeard was cruising off Charlestown bar." Jack Cockerell forsook the attempt to wring comfort out of his hardy companion, who refused to delude himself with vain imaginings. However, it is the blessed gift of youth to keep the torch of hope unquenched, and presently they diverted themselves with chatting of their earlier adventures. Jack was minded of his pompous, stout-hearted uncle, Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes, and wondered how he had fared, whether he had set out to return to Blackbeard's ship with the store of medicines from Charlestown when the great storm swooped down. Forgotten were Jack's hot grievances against the worthy secretary of the council who had sought to take a father's place. Piracy had lost its charm for young Master Cockerell, and meekly would he have obeyed the mandate to go to school in merry England among sober Christian folk. "Tremendous odd, I call it," exclaimed Joe Hawkridge. "Here I was a pirate and hating the dirty business, and my dreams were all of learning to be a gentleman ashore, to know how to read books and such. Blow me, Jack, we should have swapped berths." "If my good uncle is alive, I mean to commend you to his kindness," exclaimed Jack. "We must cleave together, and you shall have a skinful of books and school and manners." This pleased the young sea rover beyond measure, and he diverted himself with pictures of a cleaner, kindlier world than he had ever known. In the small hours of the night, the twain drowsed upon their frail platform, which floated as a speck on the shrouded ocean. The waves splashed over the spars as the breeze grew livelier, and the piteous voyagers were sopping wet, but the water was not chill, and they slept through this discomfort. Jack Cockerell dreamed of walking in a green lane of Charlestown with lovely Dorothy Stewart. A wave slapped his face, and he awoke with a sputtering cry of bewilderment. The eastern sky was rosy, and the sea shimmered in the eternal beauty of a new day. Joe Hawkridge sat huddled against the mast, chin and knees together, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. With a grin he exclaimed, "The watch ahoy! Rouse out, shipmate, and show a leg! Turn to cheerly! Hollystone decks and wash down, ye lazy lubber!" Jack groaned and scowled as he rolled over to ease his aching bones. He was in no mood for jesting. There was no land in sight, nor the gleam of a sail. Naught but the empty waste of the Atlantic, and the wind still held westerly. "Let's have the beggarly morsel, ye mystical breakfast, Joe, and a swig from the breaker. Are we bound across the Maine?" "Straight for the London River, and the school you prayed about, my bucko," replied the scamp of a pirate. Haul away on your belt, and set the buckle tighter. 'Twill ease the cursed hunger pain that gnaws like a rat. They munched a pittance of salty food, which made the thirst the harder to endure, and then watched the sun climb hot and dazzling. It was futile to hoist a sail, and so they pulled the canvas over them as the heat became more intense. By noon, Jack was begging for water to lave his tongue, but Joe Hawkridge laughed him to scorn, and swore to hit him with an oar unless he changed his tune. Never in his life had Jack known the lack of food or drink, and he therefore suffered cruelly. Worse than this privation was the increasing roughness of the sea. It was a blithesome wind, rollicking across a sparkling carpet of blue, with the little white clouds and flocks above, like lambs at play. But the raft was more and more tossed about, and the waves gushed over it like foam on a reef. Through the day the castaways might cling to it, but they dreaded another night in which their weary bodies could not possibly ward off sleep. Even though they tied themselves fast, what if the raft should be capsized by the heave of the mounting swell? It was a merest makeshift, scrambled together in haste as a ferry from the wreck of the Plymouth Adventure. No longer did Jack Cockrell bemoan his situation. Taking pattern from his comrade in misery, he set his teeth to await the end, as became a true man of gentle blood. After all, drowning was easier than the slow torments of hunger and thirst. Every little while, one of them crawled from under the canvas to look for a ship. It was a vigilant Joe Hawkridge who, at length, discovered what was very like a fleck of cloud on the ocean's rim to the southward. Afraid that his vision tricked him, he displayed no emotion, but held himself as steady as any stoic. Jack was wildly excited, blubbering and waving his arms about. His hard-won composure was broken to bits, but even though it were a ship, Joe well knew it might pass afar off, and so missighting this bit of raft which drifted almost submerged. Slowly the semblance of a wandering fragment of cloud climbed the curve of the watery globe until Joe Hawkridge perceived, with a mariner's eye, that it was indeed a vessel steering in their direction. "2 masts," said he, "and 2 gallant sails set to profit by this brave breeze. A brig, Jack. Had she been a ship, my heart would have been in my throat. Blackbeard's revenge might be working up the coast, did she live through the storm." "A brig!" joyfully cried Jack. "Aha! I see her, 2 masts plainly, with mine own eyes. And they soar too tall for a merchant trader. Her sails, too, she spreads them like great wings. Who else will it be than Captain Stede Bonnet in the Royal James?" "A shift of luck is due us, by the bones of St. Iago," shouted Joe, in a thrill of glad anticipation. "Watch her closely. You saw the brig in Charlestown harbour. Bless God, this may well be Captain Stede Bonnet yonder, and perchance he cruises in search of Blackbeard to square accounts with that vile trader that so misused him." "A sworn friend of mine is Stede Bonnet," proudly declared Jack Cockrell, "and pledged to bear a hand when I am in distress. He will land us safe in Charlestown, Joe, unless we choose to go a pirating with him in the Royal James." Jack's voice trailed off in tones of indecision so comical that his comrade cried, "Not cured yet, you big numbskull? 'Cause his fine Captain Bonnet is a gentleman pirate? His neck will stretch with the rest of them when the law overtakes him. 13 burly lads I saw swinging in a row at Wapping on the Thames." "I'll not argue it," sheepishly mumbled Jack. "However, we'll find a safe deliverance aboard this Royal James." They clung to the swaying raft while the water washed over their knees, and watched the 2 masts disclose themselves until they fancied they could not be mistaken. No other brig as powerful as this had been reported cruising in the waters of Virginia and the Carolinas. By a stroke of fortune almost incredible, they had been saved at the very brink of death. The brig was steering straight toward them, hauled to take the wind abeam, and she would be up before sunset. Shading his eyes with his hand, Joe Hawkridge suddenly uttered a curse so fierce and wicked that it was enough to freeze the blood. He clutched Jack's shoulder for support as though shorn of all his strength, and hoarsely gasped, "Not 2 masts, but 3. See it? She lifts high enough to show the stump of the foremast with head sails jerry-rigged. 'Twas the storm made a brig of her." "Then she may be Blackbeard's ship?" faltered Jack in a whisper. "Remember when the gale first broke and we parted company?" was the reply. "The Revenge lost her 4 topmasts ere the swine could find their wits." "Aye, Joe, but this may be some other vessel." "She looks most damnably familiar," was the reluctant admission. "A great press of sail. It fooled me into thinking her Stede Bonnet's brig." Gloomily they waited until the black line of the hull was visible whenever the raft lifted on the back of a wave. This was enough for Joe. He recognized the graceful sheer of the flush deck, which had been extended fore and aft to make room for a heavier Maine Battery. Even at a distance, a sailor's eye could read other signs that marked this ship as the Revenge. "The devil looks after his own," angrily exclaimed Joe. "I had wagered my last ducat that she was whirled away to founder. Blackbeard boasts of his compact with Satan. I believe it's true." "Shall we pull down our masts and pray that he passes the raft as a piece of wreckage?" implored Jack. Mustering his wits to meet this new crisis, Joe Hawkridge cried impatiently, "No, no, boy. This way death is sure, and most discomforting. If it suits Blackbeard's whim to pick us up, there is a chance, I say. But make one slip, and he will run us through with his own hand. We must arrange our tale of the wreck, Joe, to match without flaw. Quick! What have we to say?" "A task for a scholar, this," grinned the sea urchin. "If it's not well learned, will taste worse in a flogging. Where be his prize crew of pirates, asketh Blackbeard. Answer me that, Jack." "The Plymouth Adventure was driven upon a shoal and lost," glibly affirmed the other lad, who had rallied to play at this hazardous game. "Her boats were stove up. We left the pirates building a raft for themselves, and trusted ourselves to this poor contrivance, hoping to gain the coast." "Good, as far as it goes," observed the critical Joe. "And it veers close to the truth about the ship's company? What say you?" "There I hang in the wind," confessed Jack. "Blackbeard would have flung him overboard, I trow. Have a shot at it yourself." "Well, leave me to answer that when the time comes. That we may agree. Suppose we say Ned Rackham needed the sailors to work the ship, and so spared him. Hanged if we can make it all true as gospel." "But if Blackbeard searches for the wreck, or if some of those pirates rejoin him, Joe—" "But me no more buts," snapped the sea rover. "We be jammed in a clove hitch as a seaman's lingo hath it. Take trouble as it comes, and, ware ye, don't weaken." They stared at the oncoming ship, dreading to be rescued, and even more fearful of being passed by. Disfigured though she was by a shattered foremast, the Revenge made a gallant picture as she leaned to show the copper sheathing, which flashed like gold. Her bow flung the crested seas aside, and Joe Hawkridge muttered admiringly, "A swift vessel, she carries a bone in her teeth. A telescope can sight us soon. Steady the raft, Jack, whilst I wriggle up this mast of ours and wave my shirt." "A hard choice," sighed Jack. "Now we well know what it means to be betwixt the devil and the deep sea." They saw the Revenge shift her course a couple of points as the sheets were eased off. A little way to windward of the raft, she hove to while a small boat was hoisted out. Curiosity prompted Blackbeard to find out who these castaways were and from what ship they had drifted. It occurred to Joe Hawkridge that he might be in quest of tidings of the 2 sloops of his squadron which no longer kept him company. Jack Cockerell's teeth chattered, but not with cold, as the boat bobbed away from the side of the Revenge. Presently Joe recognized the pirate at the steering oar as a petty officer who had often befriended him. This fellow's swarthy, pock-marked face crinkled in a smile as he flourished his broad hat and yelled, "Stab my gizzard, but here's the London 'prentice boy a-cruisin' on his own adventure." "Right-o, Jesse Strong," called Joe back. "My bark is short-handed. I need lively recruits. Will ye enlist?" The boat's crew laughed at this as they reached out to lay hold of the raft, while the 2 lads leaped aboard. Joe Hawkridge carried it off with rough bravado, as though glad to be among his pals again. They eyed Jack Cockerell with quizzical interest, and he did his best to be at ease, permitting Joe to vouch for him as a young gentleman with a taste for piracy who had won Blackbeard's favor in the Plymouth Adventure. They were plied with eager questions regarding the fate of the merchant ship and Ned Rackham's prize crew. It was a chance to rehearse the tale as they had concocted it, and it seemed to hang together well enough to satisfy these simple rogues. In his turn, Joe Hawkridge demanded to know the gossip of the Revenge. The storm had sobered Blackbeard, it seemed, and he had displayed the skill of a masterly seaman in bringing them safely through. In toiling for their own lives, the men had forgotten their brawls and plots and guzzling. And the great wind had blown the ship clear of Spanish fever. There were no new cases, and the invalids were gaining strength. Fresh food and sea water were needed, and the opinion was that Blackbeard now steered for an old rendezvous of his on the North Carolina coast, where his sloops would meet him if they were still afloat. Jack Cockerell found his courage returning as he clambered up the side of the Revenge and followed Joe aft to the quarter-deck. Unless they bungled it, there was a chance that they might escape when the pirates made their landing on the coast to refresh themselves and refit the ship. The mate on watch greeted them good-humoredly enough and bade them enter the cabin where the captain awaited them. Jack was all aflutter again, but he managed to imitate Joe's careless swagger. Blackbeard lounged at his ease in a huge chair of carven ebony, which might have been filched from some stately East Indiaman or a ship of the Grand Mogul himself. He had flung off his coat, and the sleeves of a shirt of damask silk were rolled to the elbow. Instead of the great, mildewed sea boots, he wore slippers of crimson leather embroidered with threads of gold. Gorgeous cushions, pieces of plate, costly apparel strewed the cabin in barbaric confusion. What the two lads gazed at, however, was this bizarre figure of a despot who held the power of life and death. It was one of his quieter interludes when he laid aside the ferocious and bombastic play-acting which made it hard to discover whether he was very cunning or half-mad. The immense beard flowed down his chest instead of being tricked out in gaudy ribbons. He was idly running a comb through it when his small, rum-reddened eyes took in the two lads in dripping clothes who were shoved toward him by the sentry guarding the hatch. Blackbeard let a hairy hand straight to clutch one of the pistols kept on the table beside him. Jack Cockrell gulped and stole a frightened glance at Joe Hawkridge, who winked and nudged him. There was some small comfort in this. Spellbound, they stared at the pistol and then at the pirate's massive forearm, on which a skull and crossbones was pricked in India ink. At this moment, Jack earnestly wished himself back on the raft. The barrel of the pistol looked as big as a blunderbuss. With a yawn, Blackbeard reached for a silver bowl of Brazil nuts, cracked one of them with the pistol butt, and roared for the black cabin boy who came running with a flask of Canary wine and a goblet. Jack Cockrell's sigh of relief sounded like a porpoise coming up for air. He was not to be shot at once. Suddenly Blackbeard exclaimed, in that husky, growling voice of his, "I saw you rascals through the glass before I came below. What of the ship I left ye in? Briefly now, and no lies." Together, the lads pieced out the narrative as they had hastily prepared it. The vital thing was to watch, lest they tell a word too much. Jack stumbled once or twice, but his comrade covered it adroitly, and they did not betray themselves. The sweat trickled into their eyes, but the heat of the cabin was excuse for this. Blackbeard studied them intently, munching Brazil nuts and noisily sipping his wine. "The Plymouth Adventure stranded yestereve," said he. "Know ye the lay of the coast where the wreck lies? What of the shipmaster and Ned Rackham? Were they able to fix a shoal by reckoning?" "No, sir," readily answered Joe Hawkridge. "'Twas strange land to all hands." From a chest, Blackbeard hauled out a dog-eared chart of parchment and unrolled it upon the table. The boys foresaw his intention and feared the worst. Presently they heard him mumble to himself, "A small wind setting from the westward, 24 hours of drift for the lad's raft, 12 leagues, I call it." He looked up from the chart to ask, "The wreck was lodged fast in smooth water and holding together?" "Aye, but in peril of working off and sinking like an iron pot," answered Joe. "For this reason, the people were in haste to quit her." "Her own crew made for the beach, I have no doubt," shrewdly pursued Blackbeard. "But my men should have stayed by the wreck and watched the weather ere they shoved off. Trust to food and drink and plunder to hold them." He lumbered to the hatch and called up to the mate on watch. While they conferred, Joe Hawkridge whispered to his perturbed companion, "He will hunt for the wreck, Jack, but unless the wind changes, he can't beat into the coast with his fore-topmast gone." "A merciful delay," muttered Jack. "I worry not so much for Captain Wellesby and his people. They will hide themselves well inland when they make out the Revenge. But what of you and me? 'Tis a vexing life we lead, I will say that much, Master Cockrell." End of Chapter 6.